When Henry Morgan unleashed nearly 1,400 battle-hardened buccaneers against Fort San Lorenzo in 1671, everyone expected the fortress to fall within hours. But the women inside refused to surrender, hauling cannonballs through burning corridors, extinguishing fires beneath relentless bombardment, and even taking up muskets as they turned one of history's bloodiest pirate assaults into a desperate fight that cost Morgan far more blood than he had ever imagined. Our goal is to have 100 pirates on the team. Subscribe and leave a comment below. That way, you'll be part of our team. Picture the year 1671 and trace your finger along the Caribbean coastline toward the mouth of the Chagres River as the smell of rotting oak, boiling pine tar, damp hemp rigging, stale bilge water, burned charcoal, and humid tropical jungle drifted across the warm morning air beneath gathering storm clouds. Henry Morgan's expedition had assembled one of the largest buccaneer forces ever seen in the Spanish Main, with more than 30 vessels ranging from swift sloops of nearly 90 tons to heavier ships exceeding 200 tons, carrying nearly 1,400 fighting men armed with flintlock muskets, wheellock pistols, boarding axes, cutlasses, pikes, and hand grenades packed with coarse black powder. Every hull depended upon thick white oak futtocks fastened with hand-forged iron spikes nearly 12 inches long, while pronounced tumble-homes strengthened the sides against enemy shot and improved stability during violent broadsides. Before departure, shipwrights carefully completed careening operations, scraping away heavy barnacle growth before hammering twisted oakum deep into every seam and sealing the hull beneath boiling pine tar that hardened into a waterproof coating capable of surviving months at sea. Morgan believed Fort San Lorenzo would collapse quickly beneath overwhelming numbers, yet inside the stone fortress, the defenders understood surrender meant massacre. Among frightened soldiers, priests, merchants, and refugees stood dozens of determined women who refused to wait helplessly while the buccaneers approached through the dense tropical forest carrying scaling ladders, powder barrels, and sharpened fascines. Before the first musket fired, they hauled water, transported cannonballs weighing up to 24 pounds, stitched powder bags from coarse linen, and filled every dark corridor with supplies because they knew the coming assault would decide whether the fortress survived another sunrise or disappeared forever beneath blood, fire, and smoke. Before sunrise, the jungle echoed with the metallic sound of ramrods striking bronze cannon, the chopping of pioneers clearing brush, and the snapping of damp canvas as Morgan's advance columns emerged from thick vegetation. Spanish artillery crews prepared heavy culverins and demi-culverins cast from bronze containing nearly 88% copper and roughly 10% tin, their polished bores cleaned repeatedly to prevent dangerous fouling. Powder charges consisting of approximately 75% saltpeter, 15% charcoal, and 10% sulfur were poured through brass funnels before tightly packed wool wadding and solid iron round shot completed each load. When the touch hole flashed, expanding gases hurled the projectile forward at tremendous velocity, smashing into oak mantlets and scattering razor-sharp wooden splinters through Morgan's front ranks. Inside the fortress, the women refused to remain hidden. Some carried leather buckets from the cistern to extinguish burning beams struck by flaming projectiles, while others dragged replacement powder barrels weighing more than 50 pounds through smoke-filled passages where every spark threatened instant disaster. Several climbed exposed stone stairways under constant musket fire to deliver fresh match cord, spare flints, and canvas cartridge bags to exhausted gunners whose blackened hands trembled from hours of continuous firing. Every successful cannon discharge depended as much upon those unseen efforts behind the walls as upon the men standing beside the guns, transforming the defense into a struggle in which courage was measured not only on the battlements but also inside the choking darkness beneath them. Morgan quickly realized that a direct assault would cost hundreds of lives, so his veterans shifted tactics with ruthless discipline. Marksmen armed with long flintlock muskets advanced behind fallen tree trunks and earthen cover, firing carefully aimed volleys toward every embrasure where Spanish cannon crews appeared. Other buccaneers carried scaling ladders nearly 20 feet long, while engineers pushed forward bundles of fascines to fill ditches beneath relentless artillery fire. The defenders answered with disciplined broadsides of grape shot, each canvas bag bursting into dozens of iron balls that swept through tightly packed attackers with devastating effect. Behind the parapets, the women worked without pause. Torn powder bags were stitched by hand within minutes, damaged gun carriages were reinforced with spare oak wedges, and shattered wheel spokes were replaced before the next firing cycle. Others collected dropped muskets, cleaned fouled barrels with iron worms in tow, then reloaded them for exhausted soldiers returning to the walls. Smoke thickened until breathing became painful, mixing sulfur, burned charcoal, splintered oak, and fresh blood into an acrid haze that covered the entire fortress. Despite the chaos, several women climbed directly onto the battlements, passing loaded muskets from one defender to another, while enemy bullets shattered stone only inches away. Morgan's men expected terrified civilians. Instead, they encountered defenders whose determination transformed every staircase, courtyard, and cannon platform into another obstacle that had to be conquered one bloody yard at a time. As the battle stretched into its bloodiest hours, Morgan ordered concentrated volleys against the fortress structures themselves, hoping collapsing roofs and spreading fires would succeed where repeated assaults had failed. Flaming wads and incendiary projectiles crashed into timber buildings inside the walls, igniting dry beams, powder sheds, and storehouses. The women immediately divided into organized groups without waiting for commands. Some formed bucket lines from the central cistern, passing heavy leather buckets hand to hand while sparks drifted across the courtyard. Others ripped blankets, cloaks, and wool garments into strips, soaking them before smothering flames that threatened nearby powder magazines. Every barrel of gunpowder represented hundreds of lives. A single ember reaching the stored charges could unleash an explosion powerful enough to tear masonry apart and scatter stone blocks weighing several hundred pounds across the entire fortress. Even while extinguishing fires, they continued carrying 24-pound cannonballs, hauling replacement match cord, distributing bread and water to exhausted defenders, and helping surgeons restrain wounded soldiers as musket balls and iron splinters were extracted with crude forceps. The constant thunder of cannon echoed through the valley while shattered masonry rained onto crowded walkways. Yet despite exhaustion, smoke, and fear, the women refused to abandon their positions, knowing every minute they delayed Morgan's advance forced the attackers to pay for each step forward with more blood than they had ever expected. By late afternoon, the fortress resembled a furnace of shattered stone, burning timber, drifting sulfur, and dense black smoke that obscured entire sections of the walls. Morgan's veterans finally breached weakened defenses after repeated assaults supported by relentless musket fire, but victory came at a terrible cost. Bodies covered the approaches, broken scaling ladders lay splintered beneath the ramparts, and discarded weapons littered the blood-soaked ground. Even after the breach, groups of women continued resisting in every way they could. Some carried wounded defenders into vaulted chambers where surgeons amputated shattered limbs with iron saws heated over charcoal braziers to reduce infection. Others concealed children and elderly civilians inside thick stone magazines while moving precious food, water, and medical supplies away from advancing buccaneers. Several reportedly seized abandoned muskets and fired from narrow windows until ammunition disappeared completely. Morgan ultimately captured Fort San Lorenzo, opening the route toward Panama, yet the assault proved far more costly than he had anticipated. The courage displayed inside the fortress shattered the expectation that civilians would simply surrender before one of the most feared pirate commanders in history. Long after the smoke cleared and the walls fell silent, eyewitnesses remembered not only the relentless attack led by Henry Morgan, but also the extraordinary determination of the women whose actions prolonged the defense during one of the bloodiest assaults of the 17th century. The fall of Fort San Lorenzo became one of the defining moments of Henry Morgan's 1671 campaign, but its history was shaped by far more than pirates and soldiers alone. Behind every cannon stood civilians carrying powder, water, food, and the wounded through collapsing walls and burning corridors. Their resistance could not prevent the fortress from falling, yet it transformed the siege into a far costlier battle than Morgan had expected, proving that even during one of the bloodiest attacks of the Golden Age, courage was found far beyond the battlefield itself.